Welcome everyone to the Boao Forum for Asia here in beautiful Hainan province. I'm Michael Wong. Thanks everyone for joining us on this very sunny day on this CGTN live stream as well. This live stream is part of our Taking the Pulse of China's Economy special series, where today we will be focusing on the world's largest free trade agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, otherwise known as RCEP, which accounts for around 30% of global GDP. RCEP has major implications for regional cooperation, for regional development, as well as for regional integration, which is also a major theme at Boao 2022 as well. So, to talk more about this, we are joined today by Professor Alessandro Teixeira, the former Chief Economic Advisor to the President of Brazil. We are also joined online by Eric Bergloff, the Chief Economist at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri, who is the Executive Director at Indonesia's Center for Strategic and International Studies, as well as by Professor Lo Yu Kun, who is the Director at the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the National University of Singapore. So welcome to you all. Professor Teixeira, welcome first of all to Boao, and welcome to our panelists joining us online. I mean, it is a fantastic day here at Boao. It's been an action-packed forum so far. Professor Teixeira, I want to start with you first, because earlier today we heard Chinese President Xi Jinping speaking at the opening plenary session of the Boao Forum for Asia. Give us your overall thoughts on President Xi's speech.
I think there is four important blocks of his speech. First one is about COVID-19 and how China is taking this serious, but it was clear that he was saying that we need international cooperation. China by itself cannot solve all the problems in terms of COVID-19. The second point was about development and multilateral negotiations in terms of how can we recover the economy. In that perspective, he mentioned that there is two sides of the same coin. One is security and another is development. So he calls for a global security initiative together with the global development initiative. The third point is about the Asian economies, and that's exactly what you're talking about here, is the importance of the Asian economies with more than 30% of the GDP, with a lot of more than almost 50% of the world population as a market consumption. So intra-block trading is a very important element. And the fourth point is the resilience of the Chinese economy. As we see in the first quarter, China was 4.8% up. Yep. That's a very important. That's carrying the world economy in the back of the Chinese economy. So those are four important points that President Xi Jinping mentioned this morning.
Yeah. Professor Lo, I want to get your take on President Xi's speech earlier today as well, because President Xi was speaking about vigorously advancing Asian cooperation. What's your take on the Chinese president's speech at the Boao Forum for Asia?
Yes, definitely. I think President Xi made a wonderful speech with all the very good points that are very focused on what we actually need to do now, immediately in the future. And one specific point that President Xi mentioned was that we are all in the same boat. In other words, going together, Asia, Americas, Europe, and many other countries and continents, we literally swim or even sink together. And I like to extend this, if we are all in the same boat, supposing you have a crisis, you cannot say that, that hole is not on my side of the boat, it's on your side of the boat. In other words, if the hole is in the boat, everybody collectively will have to solve the problem together.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, this is about more regional cooperation, about regional integration, about advancing the region's economy together. That was definitely also a main theme of President Xi's speech earlier today. When it comes to RCEP, so right now our panelists, we are represented by Indonesia, by Singapore, by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which has most of the Asian countries here, and of course also Brazil. That's going to be a very interesting perspective to get Brazil's take on all of this from Professor Teixeira later in the show. But I just want to get your overall thoughts in terms of what RCEP means for Indonesia and Singapore specifically, because both of these countries are also in RCEP. So Jose, how about I come to you in terms of what you think RCEP will mean for Indonesia? I mean, first of all, for some context, China is Indonesia's largest trading partner. Last year, we saw trade going up by some 54%. So there's already a lot of trade potential between China and Indonesia. But for wider RCEP in general, what does that mean for Indonesia?
Yes, I think I cannot agree more than what you're saying, Michael, that Indonesia would get a lot of benefits from RCEP. And the importance of RCEP actually can be seen from at least two perspectives in Indonesia. First, it facilitates trade and investment relations of Indonesia with other countries in the region. That would definitely beneficial to Indonesia's economic development and also Indonesia's participation in the regional and global value chain. Another importance actually streams from the fact that in order to get the optimal benefits from the agreement, Indonesia is required to take a significant economic reforms that currently Indonesia is needed, especially to make the recovery, the economic recovery and the post-pandemic economic developments would be beneficial to the country. I think those two are the most important aspects of RCEP, especially that can be obtained from Indonesia.
So RCEP has the ability to push development forward in Indonesia. So I think overall that should also be, I think, a very unique point for RCEP in that it can definitely push emerging and developing Asia economies further ahead on the development path. Singapore, Professor Loh, I think, of course, occupies a very unique position here in the Asia-Pacific economy. It's a trade hub, it's a commerce hub, logistics hub, financial hub. How do you see Singapore's role in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership?
Yes, definitely. I think RCEP will definitely be good for all 15 members in perspective, but for Singapore in particular, it's a small country, but it's actually not so much about the size. Singapore is an open economy. I mean, if you look at the trade and the GDP of Singapore, the trade is 3 times the size of GDP. So in other words, RCEP is basically the lifeblood, I would say even the livelihood of many people in Singapore, many industries, many businesses, for individuals, for household. It is something very holistic across the board. So I believe Singapore, is something that, will want to, I would say, not only benefit, but contribute to the collective, I would say, advancement of this free trade, because over many, many years since independence, 1965, Singapore cannot run away with the fact that, it has to be inevitably plugged to the rest of the world. And that's how it is. And I think many members of RCEP will be in the same situation as Singapore, that needs that interdependency of the world open economy.
Eric, let me come to you. What is the perspective from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank on RCEP? Because one of the AIIB's core missions is to try and fill the infrastructure gap, the development gap that we see here in Asia. How do you see RCEP?
Well, RCEP, I think, is a very welcome development, and it brings together a lot of, we talk about the spaghetti bowl of different agreements in Asia. It brings them together. It simplifies a lot of things, but we should remember it's focused very much on trade in goods, not so much in services. There's a little bit on services, but if you look at what is really important for Asia are these global value chains, and they have become, the lever for many emerging and developing countries around the world to join global production. And unfortunately, RCEP doesn't do too much for that. That's where we need to think about, deeper issues around intellectual property, about SOE subsidies and so on, things that are addressed by the CPTPP. And that, I think, is the next jump that we need to make, and try to think about how can we bring together these two very important agreements.
And we'll talk about the CPTPP later on in this live stream. But Eric, I want to just follow up a little bit in terms of what do you think RCEP will do to the region's value chain and supply chains? I mean, we saw some disruptions previously when it comes to the global supply chain, obviously from the pandemic, but how much will RCEP go towards further integrating supply chains in the region?
So I think it definitely it will help, but I think in terms of the real issues that we are facing in terms of global value chains, I wouldn't say it's a game changer. It's an important contributor, but not a game changer for the global value chains. What we saw in the pandemic now is, yes, we had a very early on a shock to the global value chains when China was forced to close down in early 2020, but recovered very quickly, and it sort of is a tribute to, I think, China's logistics system that it managed to recover so quickly. Then what happened was this massive demand increase because of stimulus around the world, and that put a lot of pressure on these value chains, and that's most of the impact that we have seen has been about that. And of course now we are again a bit worried what's happening in China because of the pandemic, whether we will see another row of the disruption to the global value chains. My own perception is that we at least we should be hopeful that we can come through this relatively quickly.
I want to stick with value chains and supply chains for a little bit longer. Jose, I want to get your take on this because for me, when I take a look at the country of origin rules for RCEP, I just feel like that has a lot of potential to integrate supply chains in the region. It's just easier to trade and invest amongst RCEP member economies. I mean, so what's your take on the region's supply chains and value chains?
Yes, that's one of the major contributions of RCEP, actually, simplifications of the so-called rules of origins. Basically, virtually, RCEP reduced the number of rules of origins from hundreds in the existing agreements into like a handful of rules of origin. Trade becomes more simpler, and RCEP basically tried to simplify this and create a seamless trade facilitations. It would, of course, promote the supply chains and the value chains in the regions. But if we're talking about trade disruptions and supply chain disruptions, it's actually another story. Pandemic and geopolitical tensions, for example, just some of the causes for supply chain disruptions. The problem is not how to avoid those the issues here, but how the business and also trade can be more adaptive in dealing with unfavorable situation. Effective trade pact like RCEP actually can facilitate such environment for more adaptive supply chain and time of disruptions. It can provide platform, for example, for the discussions among countries, so that countries can keep the concerted actions to have a better situations in the times of disruption.
Professor Teixeira, I want to come to you because when we think about RCEP, I feel this is not just about the Asia Pacific, it's not just about Asia, this has global implications.
Of course.
And I feel with the value chains, perhaps integrating a little bit more here in this part of the world, that will spur more companies from around the world to invest in this region as well, because it's such a huge market. So from Latin America, perhaps South America and Brazil's perspective, how do you view this partnership?
Yes, Michael. But before I just mention one thing. We are talking about a recent implemented agreement, okay?
Yeah.
When you're talking about trade agreement, this takes time and takes dynamics. So, of course, maybe we don't have a short result in the value chain and the supply chain in the world right now, but we will have, for sure, in a middle term. Why? Basically because China, Vietnam, we are talking about a region that is the powerhouse of manufacturing producing in the world. We are not talking about 4 decades ago when China or other Asian countries were out of the global value chain. Now they are at the center of the value chain. So of course you enhance trade, but you enhance FDI. And FDI is one of the key elements of the adding value in the global value chain.
Yeah.
So we will have results, for sure. Right? That's the first thing. Second thing, of course, when you have this impact in the local level, you're going to have this impact in the global level. And I can mention many sectors around the world. For example, you're talking about renewable energy materials. China is the largest producer of not only solar panel, but is a larger producer of many different in the whole value and the whole supply chain. So of course it is going to affect not only the region, but also Latin America.
Yeah.
Especially because you are creating a larger market, you create internal dynamics. And of course, this block will communicate with other regions. I have the experience to implement Mercosur, the South Cone Agreement, and we did that for more 20 years. I was in a government for almost this time. It was, at the beginning was very hard to implement, but after we have spillovers in transfer of technology, for example, we have spillovers in science research programs.
Yeah.
So it's the beneficial, sometimes we have a short vision, but it's much more than that.
A lot of positive externalities.
A lot of
I guess.
positive
And we should
externalities.
mention, I mean, besides being the former advisor to the president, economic advisor to the president of Brazil, you were also the deputy minister of trade and industry for
Yes,
Brazil as well.
for quite
so
a
you
long
have
time,
a lot
yes.
of experience when it comes to trade negotiations as well. Okay, and I think you also touched on a good point in terms of trade, investment. It's a very nice sort of virtuous cycle that it creates.
Yes, and if
I
you
think,
put
in this part of
innovation
the
and
world.
technology is even more important, because now we are talking about that this has the potential to foster trade. Okay, trade as we think manufacturing. But let's go to another sector, digital economy. Okay, Chinese companies and other companies are already in the region. You know? Alibaba is Indonesia. You have Indonesian companies coming to China or Singapore as an international hub for many service, not products. Okay, we're talking about design. You're talking about a lot of things. So the synergy is there. It is much more broader than only trading goods.
So you're saying trading goods can promote more investment in trade and services.
Yes,
As
of
trading
course.
goods
Of
expands,
course.
trade
Of course.
and services in the
by
region
the
will expand.
nature of the regional economies. For example, Singapore is what we call international trade hub, but it's not only by manufacturing, it's a service center.
Yeah, for sure.
Service center.
Yeah.
So you can go Thailand, another one. You can go to Vietnam. You can go to Indonesia. You can go to Malaysia that we are not talking about. Huge markets, huge potential. Not only in trading goods, but in the service. So very soon, I guarantee that you're going to see this trade agreement moving up the ladder.
Okay.
Because that's the natural of the region in terms of business.
Okay, got it. Very interesting points. Thanks for that, Professor Teixeira. Singapore, I want to get Singapore's perspective on regional cooperation. Professor Loh, I want to come back to you. So yesterday at a session I was attending, there was quite an interesting perspective from Professor Mahbubani, Kishore Mahbubani, which I'm sure you know quite well. And he was talking about this part of the world here in the Asia Pacific, facing geopolitical tensions that may be trying to divide this part of the world. And he was stressing that the stability of Asia has really led to this fantastic development in this part of the world that has raised the living standards, produced productivity gains, produced prosperity. And right now it is sort of on the cusp of facing these headwinds from potential geopolitical tensions and divisions. So how do you see Asia Pacific, Asia, RCEP really not losing that spirit of cooperation in the face of these headwinds?
Definitely, I think if you look at RCEP in particular, it is really an enabler, a win-win mechanism for all the members to collectively come together to share all the benefits of growth. In fact, if you look at RCEP, just now we talked about the supply chain. RCEP in itself is an Asia-Pacific super supply chain. It can facilitate the movement of many services, but especially, and this I think, once the trade is in place, you create that channels of communication, the channels of engagement, and I think individually and collectively, many of the things we do in economic interaction will enhance mutual trust And I think geopolitical tension or even relationships should stand fundamentally on the very firm pedestal of good economic relations. Good economic relationship is a given, is the bedrock upon which country to country relationship should be built on. And I think RCEP will provide the very critical fabric to undergird how countries should interact. I think, all the things that's happening since the ratification, the approval, the signing coming into effect this January. I think, with a lot of simplified rules, I'm sure you are aware of the 40% rule in the rules of origin. And I think, if any services or, any goods can be sourced within the bloc at this 40%, it is considered for preferential treatment. I think this really enhances the potential for countries to come together, and I think this will override all the misunderstanding, all the misgiving we have now in the very great geopolitical tension.
Eric, I want to come over to you, and I wonder whether any research has been done by the AIIB in terms of the potential productivity gains that we might see once RCEP matures.
So we haven't done any specific work on that, but they are significant, and I think they are. I mean, I was stressing it a bit before that what RCEP doesn't address, but I think it, some of the other speakers have brought out what it does address, and the rules of origin, very important. It as I said, simplifies, brings together a lot of separate free trade agreements in the region, all very important. It's something to build on. But we should have emphasized, and that was something that was brought up also, that trade today is much more about services and information flows, and particularly when we talk about the global value chains, that's what really matters. And that's where RCEP, has potential, but probably does not address as much today. And just one more point that I think was also important that was mentioned is that, it has really changed the global value chains from where these countries in Asia were sort of secondary to and they were part of it, but not really at the center. And now they have become at the center of these global value chains. But so when we see now these headwinds of global value chains, it is those developing and emerging economies that have been able to join over the last 10, 15 years. They are the ones that are most affected by these headwinds too. So when you look at who have lost out on these headwinds, it's very much those countries, and I think that's what we should have in mind. And of course now what we see is that after the pandemic, with all the buffers have been depleted both at the national level, in individual households, in companies, and so on. And now comes another shock on food prices, fuel, probably increase in defense costs, all these things coming, to really create some very serious headwinds. And that's where I think RCEP is so important to give us some confidence that we can still work together.
Yeah, so Jose, on that note, in terms of the economic headwinds that we see right now and just the overall uncertainty that we see in the world right now, how big of a catalyst do you see RCEP as in terms of spurring the global recovery?
As I mentioned before, RCEP has a potential to provide platform for discussions. So even if we have escalating geopolitical tensions and many other issues, RCEP hopefully would provide that platforms of discussions so that each countries in the regions can also take actions that minimize the harmful effect to other countries, and that's basically what we currently need. At the moment, we normally have in the past we do have the reliable multilateral trading systems, but unfortunately for the last 5 or 6 years, the multilateral trading systems has been declining. The role has been declining. So if we have this kind of regional systems that at least to replace for a while that kind of platforms that can provide that platforms, it would be quite beneficial in reducing the economic effects of the geopolitical tensions or other issues that lingering at the moment.
Yusei, I want to stick with you for one more question. I'm just super excited about the potential for small businesses in the region to really benefit from RCEP. I mean, personally, I love the flavors of Southeast Asia, of ASEAN. I love the fashion of ASEAN as well. I want to see more Southeast Asian products here in China. So in terms of what you see for Indonesian small businesses, how they can take advantage of this partnership agreement, what does it mean for them?
Yeah. Actually, small and medium businesses are basically quite is the major characteristics of Southeast Asian economies. So RCEP have the potential to promote them for internationalization, to access international market. One of the interesting feature of RCEP is actually economic assistance and capacity building. That can be actually driven or shaped into providing assistance towards a small and medium enterprise in the regions. Currently, I think the natures of this technical assistance, economic assistance, and capacity building is still under developing. But we hope that if this kind of capacity building can be utilized optimally, it would help the most of the small and medium enterprise in the region.
Professor Teixeira, I want to come to you and maybe give us some context and perspectives about some of the major advantages of RCEP. So we talked about the country of origin rules, now just 40% content, and then you can qualify for much lower tariffs or zero tariffs. In terms of small businesses as well.
Market access.
Market access
is one of the easiest way to investment, is the second one.
Yeah.
You know, although we talk a lot, and that was took years for me to discuss that in WTO. Okay? We talk a lot about free trade.
Yeah.
But logistics is one of the things that cost more and can finish you with the free trade. So you have a lot of elements in the region that can help, okay? Especially small business. Because for small business, as Professor was saying, you need to build capabilities. Export is not an easy task.
Yeah.
You know, you need to adapt your product, you need to develop packaging, you need to have someone that takes care of the logistics, you need to see what kind of a market channel you can use. Okay? But when you have a comprehensive agreement like RCEP, you can change institutionally how you do those things. So for example, the export agents of Malaysia, of Indonesia, of Singapore is going to be working hand to hand or shoulder to shoulder with China in terms of market access, origin rules. So this changes, not at the macro, we tend to see the macro level, but there is a micro level that is very important in terms of trade. And I'm sure that this kind of agreement, although it takes a little time to move and to learn, it's going to be very beneficial. And we are not talking about job and employment opportunities, cross investments, strategical alliance. So all this would help small and medium-sized companies to be really globalized in terms of the region.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of cross change in terms of cooperation between companies, but I'm expected to see much more. As you said at the beginning of the program, 30% of the GDP of the world is concentrated in this region. And we see in the next 10 to 20 years, this number is going to jump to 40%. So that's very important. But how is going to jump? Through agreements like that. So it's very, very important.
So what about lowering tariffs to zero for 90% of products, or over 90% of the products in the region in about 20 years' time? I just want to get your perspective in terms of how that compares maybe to other free trade agreements around the world. Like Mercosur, like the EU, like USMCA. It's not easy.
It's not easy.
Okay.
It's going to take a lot of exceptions, because at the same time you do agreements like that, you need to have a time okay, to protect, you need to raise down the wall. And that's normal in every single free trade agreement in the world.
Yeah.
It was like that in European Union. It's like that in Mercosur. So because those sectors in different countries, they compete with each other.
Yeah.
So you need to put down the barrier. In some cases, you're going to specialize parts of the supply chain in one country, parts in another one, but this takes time. So 20 years, I think it's a good time, but it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Because even in 2 decades to lower to zero is going to take a lot of commitment. And that's what President Xi Jinping was talking today. China, as the largest economy of the region, is committed to that goal. It's very good for us to know that, because if the largest economy is not committed to that goal, it's almost impossible you achieve those goals.
Speaking of the Chinese economy, Professor Teixeira, I want to follow up on that, because China recently announced it will accelerate the building of a domestic unified market, right? This big unified domestic market,
yes,
in terms of standards, in terms of products. I mean, how big of an opportunity is that, you think?
It's a huge opportunity. It's a huge challenge. You're talking about standards. That's a huge thing to do, because you need to, the standards in different countries, you need to have a recognition of the standards of all the patterns of production. For example, you talk about chemistry that you have in your clothes, the size. It's not easy. When you're really doing international trade, you see that the little things is where you lose more time. But as I said, China's commitment to create this gigantic market, that if you include India on it, if you include all the Asian plus, that I believe is going to happen very soon.
Yeah.
Because every economy in the world see the opportunity. This is going to be a gigantic and a step forward.
Yeah.
In terms of trade. This can change the face of trading in the world. We try for many years in WTO to discuss in large open economy, but it's difficult. But if we have an example of Asian economies with the diversification, because we are talking about a region, you need to remember, everybody, that is different countries, that have different culture.
Yeah.
So if you achieve that, that's a milestone in our international trade history.
Professor Teixeira, you might have addressed an elephant in the room, and I want to ask Professor Loh this question. Professor Loh, so Professor Teixeira mentioned India just now. India is currently not in RCEP. It was negotiating RCEP, but it's currently not in RCEP. What do you think about India not being in this trade agreement? Do you think India will eventually join at some point? I mean, what are the implications for this agreement if such a large economy like India is not in there?
Yes, I think first of all, it's definitely a pity, at the last minute, because of certain domestic situations and constraints, India could not proceed with the RCEP. But having said that, I think we should not lose hope, because in every free trade agreement, it is inevitable that for every domestic setting, there might be some quick winners, and maybe for those which may not immediately benefit, they are somewhat like transient losers. I think it is for every domestic economy to do a very careful, very delicate calibration of all the benefits as well as challenges, because if you look at RCEP or any FTA, that there's a lot of multiplier effect in terms of scoping. There's a lot of synergy effect in terms of scaling. So I think India will definitely now go back, circumvent some of the internal concerns, particularly because probably every economy has the natural right to be, a little bit, I would say, worried about some agricultural products coming in, or some other form of cheaper produced goods that might come into the country because of a FTA zero tariff. So I think India will, in the immediate future, I believe they will get their act together and do a very careful calculation. But particularly, we are talking just now about headwinds. And I think, even in geopolitics, in some of the economic challenges, rising interest rate, inflation, all these are headwinds. We have to be comfortable that the free trade will be the tailwind. If you have headwinds, free trade will be the tailwind that can propel everybody forward together.
Yeah. And hopefully that tailwind is much stronger than the headwinds that we face right now. And I certainly think that that will be the case. When it comes to the harmonization, perhaps, of RCEP with two other major trade agreements, one is the Digital Economic Partnership Agreement, which I believe is initiated by Singapore, and China wants to join that as well as the CPTPP. So, Eric, I want to come to you first and talk about the CPTPP in terms of the differences between these two. So, one panelist at a session here at the Boao Forum spoke about the differences like this. So, RCEP is more inclusive, and the CPTPP is higher standard. First of all, do you agree with that definition?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. I think it also deals with the future more with the past. I think some of the development that we have described now, that RCEP kind of solidifies some developments that are already underway, and there were many individual agreements that sort of now are brought together, and that's a big step forward. But really, the trade is going to be in the future. It's going to be about services, it's going to be about information flows, and that's where CPTPP really makes a difference. And it's about IP, which we spoke about the importance of the digital. That's where IP comes in, of course, massively. And some of these rules around the SOEs and so on, all those things will be addressed there. It's a very different type of agreement, and it goes much deeper. And it's in that sense, it's going to be about, you said it, standards, and standards that's the future, and that's when we talked about opening up markets, and it's about creating those standards that allows everyone to come together.
So, Eric, if that's the case, do you see some form of potential harmonization in the future between RCEP and the CPTPP? Because there is some overlap in terms of the countries. Are there ways to make these two large trade agreements to work with each other down the road?
I think so. I mean, obviously, China has expressed its interest in joining CPTPP, so we'll see how that plays out. Of course, I think that would be a massive step forward for that agreement, of course. But we know that it's going to be politically perhaps difficult. But I think if we could get that, to me, that would be an even greater achievement than RCEP. So let's see. I mean, there will be there is definitely overlap, but I think RCEP needs to deal with these issues in the future, because that's where all the trade will be in the long run.
You'll say there's a dedicated section in RCEP when it comes to e-commerce. I mean, what is the potential of really amplifying the power of e-commerce and connecting economies even more under RCEP?
Yes, I think I also want to say some things about CPTPP and RCEP because as other speakers also already mentioned, CPTPP is higher quality agreement. Actually, in RCEP, RCEP also discuss about certain issues that appear in CPTPP, but it's less deeper discussions, including also in e-commerce, digital trade, and several other aspects of the new type of trade. Basically, in my opinions, RCEP at one point in time also need to discuss those aspects in more serious way. And CPTPP at the moment can serve as a laboratory for those new commitments, especially for RCEP members. But RCEP needs to catch up. Otherwise, it would not be able to provide necessary rules and disciplines for the new era of trade and economic, especially in the post-pandemic era, like the digital trade, e-commerce, and many other aspects, including also the competition policy related to trade or IP policy, intellectual property policy that would be that would be related to trade in a more intensive way in the future.
Okay, then Professor Loh, let me come to you with e-commerce then, because Singapore is definitely an e-commerce powerhouse in the region as well. So what's your take in terms of unlocking the potential of e-commerce here in RCEP?
Oh, definitely. If you look at RCEP, of course, there's a geographical logic to this free trade agreement, and it's bounded by, I'll say, time and space in terms of real physical space. So that's RCEP in terms of movement of, goods and some services. But if you look at the e-com or even the virtual space, this is basically RCEP unlimited. In other words, you can really stretch the potential of RCEP such that you can go into cyberspace and look at some of the free flow of goods facilitated not only through that e-com, but e-com in itself could be that commodity, that product, or even that special entity that is enabled to be moved across borders. So I think that the next leg for RCEP is actually going into this new frontier of digitalization, where we embrace high technology. I think with this augmentation to RCEP, particularly to e-com, and I think it's just right. Singapore is also at the heart of it, precisely because I mentioned just now, Singapore is small. So the way we see that if we want to expand our sphere of engagement, the cyberspace is the logical place to go to. So I would see that RCEP would realize its fullest potential if we go really deep into the digital realm. And I think that's literally, the sky is not even the limit, because it is really boundless. Yeah.
Sky's not even the limit for digital and e-commerce under RCEP. That's quite a fascinating perspective, Professor Loh. So I guess space is the limit, but either way, there's a lot of potential for cross-border e-commerce for RCEP. Great, thanks for that. Professor Teixeira, how many times have you been to the Boao Forum? Is this your first time? Or
Second time.
Your second time. I want to get your take overall on this province, because the entire province is a free trade port. And China has said that it wants to build Hainan into a really high quality global free trade port with global influence as well. Do you see any advantages that Hainan has in terms of really acting as a key node for RCEP and the policies here?
Yeah, I've been here in 2012 accompanying the president of Brazil in that time, President Dilma. It was the first time a Latin American president would come to Boao. So we are 10 years ago almost. And I see a lot of difference in terms of the strategy for Hainan. Okay, traditionally Hainan it's a tourist destination. So the first industry, the natural advantage of Hainan is in the tourism. But of course, you need to diversify. So when you're talking about Hainan in terms of international trade, of course, has some advantage. First advantage is the geographic location. Why? Because it can be a gateway to China. But of course, you cannot do that, just say, okay, the geographic location is no, you need to build the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So that comes to the port and the ports. And in the case of the port, the very important point, as I mentioned before, is the logistical. Okay.
Yeah.
So, for example, not to talk too technical for our audience, but a port that is not that doesn't have let me say is not modern managed. The lineup of the boats to get in can take 30 days, can take 20 days. This is cost. Imagine a boat stop with products that cannot get in for 20 days.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare. And that's what happened around the world. So create a specialized port, okay, in a strategic location that is the face of Asia, that can come in and can come out with modern techniques. We are talking about tax reduction as a policy for companies that can add value in Hainan. Okay, so that's very important. And third, we have an independent custom. Not to only independent, but what means independent in that case can speed up the process of custom and get in and get out. So in the international trade, time is cost.
Yeah.
Cost is money and profit. So this equation is very, very important. So I see, of course, depending on the policies that we're going to put in place, but I see the natural advantage of Hainan to be a hub for international trade.
Yeah.
And by its strategical location, a great possibility, and by the commitment of the central government and the Hainan government that I have talked with some officials, has a great natural advantage on that. So I see with very good eyes, Hainan, especially with all these regional agreements, an opportunity for Hainan to diversify its economy and really became an international hub, not for China, but for the region.
Yeah, I mean, it really is diversifying. Hainan's really getting up there in terms of biomedicine.
Health, yeah, biomedicine.
Yeah. There's a lot of tax policies here that are advantageous, investment policies as well. So perhaps I can see, for example, a company from ASEAN setting up base here in Hainan, selling to the Chinese mainland, taking advantage of the preferential policies here, selling to the rest of the RCEP region through ASEAN. So could be. And geographic location, I mean, it's so close to ASEAN as well.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. You mentioned infrastructure. I want to follow up a little bit on that because I feel like you need the infrastructure to unlock the potential of RCEP. You talk about logistics. I want to
You
get your
need
take
infrastructure for everything. We are talking about digital economy, right?
Yeah.
I always talk about this because you're talking, okay, why China has doing a digital transformation in Chinese economy, Chinese society. The answer is infrastructure. And why is simple? You can go to any place, okay? We can talk about Indonesia, 17,000 islands.
Yeah.
Okay, 17,000 islands. How you build infrastructure? And I'm not talking logistics, I'm talking about broadband, internet access. Not only for trade, but for education.
Yeah.
So for example, we're talking about Latin America, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about technology. Without broadband, without internet access, without a cheap handset for you use as mobile phone, you cannot talk about digital transformation.
Yeah.
So those elements are very important. I think it's a very important element the IIIB have to do with this agreements in terms of, okay, how can I maximize, how can I work in the region to be really the lead in terms of infrastructure? Because we are talking about integrative infrastructure. You're talking about the integrating the market, logistically and, for example, digitally. Okay, if you want to talk about standards, you need to integrate the markets. So those elements to me are very basic in terms. I see overlapping between the two agreements. I do, but also I see difference. I don't like one is high quality, another is not high quality.
You don't agree with that perspective?
Partially,
okay.
But I don't like to label. I have been working with international trade for 30 years almost. Okay, so to me, labeling, oh, this is a high quality, this is a low quality. No, because as Professor Lu said, a trade agreement is not something obsolete, it's something that is dynamic. You can expand.
Yeah.
But the decision, as we see, about political, geopolitical, is what's going to say if those two agreements can join or can be separate. Because I just put India in the conversation, but I can put in the TPCC, United States as well. That is out of the region. I can put Peru out of the region. Okay, so those elements are very important. It's much more important than just say, okay, they are high quality, low quality. No. You can transform this dynamic trade agreement.
Oh, so a lot of food for thought there.
Yes.
Professor Teixeira, one more thing about infrastructure in terms of how you see China's Belt and Road Initiative really acting sort of as an infrastructure catalyzer for RCEP, because we saw the China-Laos Railway opening, and you really changed Laos from a landlocked country into one that's land-linked that can really unlock the potential, for example, of Laos to take advantage of RCEP better. So how do you see the BRI fitting into RCEP?
I think BRI, some people call a project. I like to call BRI as a platform, a cooperation platform. Do you know, take two to dance tango. Okay, not one. So, and that's what China keep telling the countries, okay, you want, we can help. It's not a Chinese anymore project.
Yeah.
It's a platform. So, in my opinion, BRI can be one of the elements that can help the infrastructural development in the region. but we need help. It cannot be done by only one country. It needs to be 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is the next step to me in terms of BRI, is to get more countries involved. Latin America is joined BRI quite extensively now. Before was Chile, now we have Argentina. Very soon, I hope next year we have Brazil completely joined, okay, in terms of region. And infrastructure is the huge problem in Latin America, especially for commodities, for example. So I see Belt and Road with a great role in the region to help different institutions to set up and to improve the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure in the region.
Got it. Eric, I want to come to you in terms of what else is unique about RCEP. I mean, this is the first free trade agreement that really links China, Japan, and South Korea together under an FTA. What do you think is the significance of that?
I think that's very significant. I just wanted to comment on something that was before, because I think it is a very important point around the role of infrastructure. And you know, you mentioned the Indonesia with its 17,000 islands. We actually worked on and are working on a very interesting project that using satellites to allow broadband to come across most of these islands. And it was interesting with that is also a project that actually is a public-private partnership, so brings in private sector into this development. And I think this is the kind of things that we really need to leverage RCEP. You mentioned also Hainan. I was in Hainan about 15 years ago for the first time. You know, at that time there was a property bust, and you know, you walked through all these kind of semi-finished luxury hotels, and it was like almost like a cemetery. And to come back to it now, you know, with all the developments that have happened, and I think one factor we shouldn't forget, and I think it goes to also these, you know, the point that was made about the dynamics of these relationships, because what's going to come in more and more into this is going to be the sustainability factor. And I think that's where, if you look at Hainan's, its future, I think it's very much in that space. We're talking about, you know, tourists, but you can build on that, you know, many things around the quality of life things, the health, you know, biomedicine, all that. And actually, we are also working on a port in Hainan, and we hope that we're able to contribute to that development. So the sustainability future, the decarbonization will also be a massive challenge for Asia, and that's where also I think bringing that element into the trade negotiations, trade agreements is going to be absolutely critical, and that's where maybe I agree we shouldn't talk too much about low quality, high quality, but I think that feature is not very present in RCEP at the moment, and that's something that needs to be deepened, I think, because, you know, if we talk about what's going to shape where things are going to be produced, how they're going to be produced, and by whom, it's going to be a lot about, you know, your ability to bring down your carbon footprint, not only for a single factory, but for the whole value chain. And that's a real challenge for Asia, I think, and one that we cannot forget.
So, Professor Lothan, how do we think about meshing together sustainability with RCEP? Because we can definitely expect trade and investment to increase here in the region under RCEP. How do we absolutely put in sustainability as well? I mean, sustainability, the environment, green, has been a huge agenda item here at Boao Forum 2022.
Yes, definitely if you look at free trade or even the movement of goods and services, this is not actually fundamentally mutually exclusive from sustainability. You can have sustainable trade, and I think this is one of the movements that's going on now, not only in terms of the products that go through the flow, where, you know, many of the I would say commodities are sustainability sourced and, you know, produced. But at the same time, I think the RCEP open possibilities for all member economies to actually source from the most sustainable place of origin. And I think, you know, this is going to actually change the whole game plan altogether. You can actually, in a collective way, enhance the effectiveness of efficiency of sustainability, because now you can literally go around, say, 15 countries and see where you can actually get the most sustainable source for whatever you need. And I think ultimately RCEP is going to be the common arbiter for, trying to promote our, collective prosperity based on sustainability. In fact, based on your question, I think RCEP is actually RCEP rallying call for eternal prosperity. Yes, so I think that's really what sustainability is all about. RCEP can be that rallying call for eternal prosperity.
I see. So RCEP can definitely be an amplifier for sustainable trade, for green technologies as well. That's a very good point, Professor Loh. Jose, I want to really come back to you real quick in terms of what we mentioned. Indonesia, like Professor Teixeira mentioned, 14,000, maybe 15,000 islands. I mean, how do you really unlock the potential of Indonesia under RCEP through better connectivity of these islands? I mean, does China's BRI also play a role in here?
Yes, of course, China's BRI and also AIIB have contributed a lot to the development of infrastructure in Indonesia. And as we also know that RCEP basically provide platforms for disciplines and rules for trade, investment, and other economic activities that complements the infrastructure and connectivity that we need for economic activities. If we have both of them together and in a good collaboration and synergy, as many previous speakers also already mentioned, I believe that the economic developments in the regions, including also in Indonesia, would be stronger and get the optimal situation.
I like the word synergies, Professor Teixeira. I mean, do you see more synergies between RCEP? Because we keep on mentioning the spaghetti bowl effect, right? It's a patchwork of bilateral FTAs. I mean, we saw at the end of 2021 some, 350 regional free trade agreements in the world. These two, CPTPP, RCEP, two major ones for this year. But in terms of synergies of RCEP with the rest of the world, perhaps with Mercosur, with USMCA, with the EU, I mean, what kind of synergies do you see?
Look, you use the right word, synergies, okay? Because you can implement a trade agreement.
That was Jose's
yes,
word.
yes.
I like the word, though.
Yeah,
you like the word.
Synergies are very important because there is a level that is political level and there is a level that is economic level, okay? But if you have synergy, you kind of guide those two levels because the political level is very important to start the process, but the economic level is very important to continue.
Yeah.
So I see RCEP as, again, you have the participation of China, you have all the other economies around the area. There are not small economies, that it needs to say, because we are talking about Malaysia, you're talking about Indonesia, they are huge markets.
Yeah, huge.
They are huge. People, they don't, especially in my side of the world, that think, okay, Malaysia, Indonesia, we don't know much about it, okay? But when you go and dig a little bit more in the economy of Asia, you see markets with over 200 million consumers. So I think there is a political will, and that's very important, to take this agreement forward. I mentioned India because I think in the near future, India is going to join the agreement. It's normal when you have a large economy like India, you had, as Professor Lu and Professor Youssef just mentioned, you need to calculate who is winning, who is losing. But in agreement with this magnitude, it's a question of time for India to join, okay? Because the location and everything. So I believe that this has a huge potential to serve, and again, it's not, Michael, and that's I need to be clear, it's not short term, it's not, it's start now and next year you're going to have huge results. We need to give time to this to enroll, but it's something that WTO worked a lot since the Bali round to try to push these local agreements, international agreements, and unfortunately, we didn't succeed in the way we wanted. But I think those two agreements, that's why I don't like to talk about high standards, low standards. Those two agreements has the capability to develop itself in good result that can inspire other region. It's not easy. It takes a lot of diplomacy, it takes a lot of diplomatic economic relations. But I think the commitment, that's again, if we have the commitment of the largest economy, the case of China, and I see Korea, Japan talking good about the process as well of the regional integration, economic integration, I think we are in the right path.
Well, I'm certainly excited about RCEP. Certainly the sky's the limit for economic trade and investment potential here, but we're all out of time. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Teixeira. Many titles, a lot of experience, the former economic advisor to the President of Brazil, also the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry of Brazil as well. Thank you, Professor Teixeira, for your time. And of course, thank you to Eric Bergloff, the Chief Economist at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, to Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri, Executive Director at Indonesia Center for Strategic and International Studies. And of course, thank you to Mr. Lo Yu Kun, Director at the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the National University of Singapore. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Certainly, RCEP, I think, will definitely contribute to Asia's shared future. I'm Michael Wong here in CGTN's Boao studio. We will continue our coverage of the Boao Forum for Asia 2022, so stay tuned.